Hey guys, iKailaKai here at the Tokyo Championship. Now right now it is OP14 with EB03 and without EB04, but I think that the meta is quite similar to what you guys are going to end up because EB03 didn't change the meta all too much except for maybe making Vivi and Blue Nami a bit stronger. In this video, it's just a bit of a casual video where I talk about my matchups and talk about how everything went. Today I had to fight a lot of battles. Not only was I fighting 9 different opponents today, and I believe 7 different decks, I'll have to check that. This is what I hit today. But also I was fighting the heat from wearing this thing, people stepping on my cape. It was quite a difficult day in more ways than one. But still, let's talk about how it went because I did end up going 7-2 today. Fortunately, I did end up losing the last round against Ace, which was really tragic. I tried my best. If I won that matchup, then I would have made it into, not top cut, but I would have made it to the Japan finals because I would have gotten to the top 32, but unfortunately, that was not the case today. I finished my run at 7-2, barely missing out at the end. So let's go through our matchups. Oh, I don't even think I mentioned exactly what deck I was playing today. Today I brought Imu, which is not a surprise for me, I guess, but OP14 brought a lot of new counters to Imu. Everyone's saying that Imu's gone now, but I don't think so. I think Imu is as strong as ever. I think that the meta has just changed and the matchups you need to learn have changed. So therefore, instead of learning a new deck, although I did consider some other options like blue, purple Luffy and green Bonney because I thought it'd be very good options to bring in the case that I could dodge Imu because Imu's play rate has going down, I decided to just go with the safe option, the option that I know the most, and to just play black Imu and hopefully target some of those matchups like green Bonney or blue, purple Luffy that are coming to try to dodge Imu. So for that reason I brought Imu today, and this is the list that I played. It's a rather common list, but there are a couple of things that people have been debating in Imu's list, mainly Ground Death. Ground Death is a new card in OP14, and this card is very, very strong in Imu. Not only can it nullify one of the opponent's 5 cost or less, which historically in OP13 would mean that you could get rid of a blocker and then go for lethal, but also has counter, which if you have 10 cards or more in your trash, which means basically no condition for Imu, then you get plus 4,000 power to your leader or character. Now there's been a lot of debate about if this card's actually better than the plus 3k event, because there are actually some times where you use the main effect of the plus 3k event, but in OP14 a lot of counters to Imu have been printed specifically in 5 costs that are very difficult to remove from the board. Not only do you have the new Virgo, you also have the new Tashigi, and none of these cards can actually be KO'd by the main effect of the 3k counter event. You could instead nullify these characters with Ground Death and then use Mars to be able to KO them anyways. While this is a -3 to your hand, it's still very solid, and a lot of these matchups today it did actually save me. Against Bonney, for example, I was able to nullify Coleslaw to get rid of Cavendish on curve, but other things happened that game, so let's not talk about that too much yet. Still, because there's a lot of very powerful use cases for Ground Death, the only downside of it being that it's not searchable off of Saturn, I decided to bring this ratio of events. Still, round 1 I fought Mihawk, and this is one of the new matchups and one of the matchups that people say kills Imu. I don't necessarily think that this deck actually kills Imu. I think that it's a slightly difficult matchup for Imu if Mihawk can draw all of his pieces. If you were to starve him, then the chances of him having the 7 cost Shanks on that 7 long turn is, I believe, 65 to like 80% or something depending on their searches. I don't quite remember the math, but it's not that high. And even if they do put out this thing because you starved them, you actually have a better chance of taking back this Shanks through combat. That's my general game plan for this matchup currently. I don't actually know if it's going to be correct. I still need to test the matchup a little bit more, but obviously I'll update my Imu guide as I keep going on. But my basic strategy for this matchup was to play down Nasujiro, leave it active, make sure that I keep it alive, even if it means using counter events and a lot of counter if the opponent rests it with their 7 cost Shanks. Then the next turn, play out another Nasujiro and either get a ton of cards out of the opponent's hand or take out Shanks. By putting down 2 Nasujiro, I effectively force the opponent to hit into my board, which slows down their aggression, and that gives me enough time to get into my 10 cost Gorose. And if I can manage to knock down one of the opponent's 7 cost Shanks, then I feel like I can win this matchup, and that's exactly how it ended up going. The first 7 cost Shanks came out, I was able to clear this character quite cleanly on the 7 long turn, and then the next turn he played another one, but after that point it was a bit too late as I was just able to run him over with the amount of attacks that I had that came out of my 10 cost Gorose. So therefore this was a rather comfortable win for me, and once again, I still feel like Mihawk's a bit of a fake deck, but I understand, at least because I'm at the Tokyo Championship, that I think that a lot of Mihawks made it to top cut, so, you know, maybe there's something there and I'm just a bit of a hater. But also maybe they just dodged Imu, who knows. Nonetheless, I think this matchup isn't as bad as people say it is. You just need to kind of learn the lines. Right now I found one line that works, I found another line that sometimes works, but it's a bit more risky. Again, just needs some more testing, but this is what happens in week 1 tournaments, because no one really knows what they're doing quite yet. Round 2, I fought Ace, and I was going first, and this matchup does seem like it can be slightly unfavorable when you're going first, but I feel like if I can just find my Nasudo early on and make sure that I can keep it on the board, then it's very easy for me to control the board and the pace of the game. I was able to slow down his aggression enough to the point that I was able to leave 3 life at the end, although my hand was about like 2 or 3 at the time, and slowly with Tenka Skorose, I just chipped back, made it so that his Roger was very far away from actually killing me, and ended up winning this game as well. The third match is actually the matchup that I was most scared of hitting today. Hancock is a very scary deck for me. In the beginning, I was trying to counter out the attacks, try to stay as healthy as possible to be at maybe 3 to 2 life, but when he played down the 5-cost Nami, which not every list runs, I was forced to take my life, and now was in a more dangerous position where if I were to keep defending my life and the opponent eventually keeps playing out 9-cost Hancocks, then I get into a worse and worse position. And so I made a situation where on Tendong, I decided to go down to 0 life, although I was at 1, by taking out the opponent's board, taking my own life, and being in a spot where the only character on his board was the 9-cost Hancock and his leader, while I had a full board full of the Gorose. Now, the scariest card and the scariest combo would be for the opponent to play Pudding into Perfume Femur, but there's nothing you can really do about that, which is why I don't really like fighting Hancock, because sometimes they just have it. But this time, luckily, they didn't have it. Instead, they only had Perfume Femur and only hit me for 20,000. So, obviously, because you're Imu, 20,000 is nothing. So, you know, +4, +4, +4, +4. Oh, it's good. So I was able to defend one of these Perfume Femur attacks, and next turn I needed to finish the game. And because of Gorgon Sisters, I knew the opponent had 2k, 2k, 1k in their hand. Then the next life that they took, they hesitated, because it was obviously a trigger card. They looked at their hand, and for me, this is a big red flag that this is 100% Shakuyaku. The only reason you would think about Shakuyaku is if you think that the 1 draw plus the 2 draw 2 trash would be more valuable than actually having it in your hand. But the person thought about it, decided to put it to hand, so I knew 100% the opponent had 3 2ks and a 1k, so therefore I just hit in a very uncomfortable way to make them use these counter, and hope that the opponent didn't have any other additional counter on top of those 2ks and 1ks, and luckily they didn't. So I was able to find a very lucky lethal in the end, because the last card in the opponent's hand was a second Perfume Femur. If I tried to last one more turn with another 10-cost Gorose, then I would have lost, because I wouldn't be able to recover enough counter defend against a 15,000 unblockable. So in the end, it was the correct decision, but I felt quite confident in that decision, because obviously I knew a lot of counter in the opponent's hand. Round 4, we can talk about the elephant in the room now. I fought against Bonney, and I lost. I'm losing my hat from all the trauma. No, that was a very disappointing game. In the early game, I don't remember if I kept my hand. I was going first against Bonney, and unfortunately, I drew an insane amount of counter events in the early game. By the 9-dong turn, my hand was... I cut a couple from my hand at that point, but I had drawn 7 counter events and had 2 Goros in my hand, so it was very difficult for me to actually hold on to the attacks. I was able to use one of these counter events to nullify the opponent's Koshiro and take out Cavendish with Mars, but unfortunately the next turn the opponent just responded with another Cavendish as well as something, which I don't quite remember exactly what it was. It made it very difficult for me to actually take back the opponent's board because the opponent had a lot of counter and blockers on the board. Still, it was just the perfect storm of the opponent having the right cards. The opponent was able to play Law Beppo against me twice, although I was able to defend against the first one, not let him go to 7k by just leaving my Nashiro active on the first turn. But in the end, just because I had to cut so many counter events from my hand through my leader effect to just try to find the pieces for my 10-cost Gorose, I ended up not having enough counter in the end when the opponent just went for a Hail Mary lethal with Hody. So unfortunately, although this matchup should be very winning for Ime, I just drew my cards at the wrong timing, and it was just not my game. There's maybe an argument that I should have just used my Mars scale, the Koshiro, and left the Cavendish on the board and just wait until 10-cost Gorose to be able to get rid of that card. But I think the way that I played that out, the only punch would be if the opponent had another Cavendish, and I didn't know that they had another Cavendish. If they didn't have a Cavendish, I'd feel very, very comfortable in that position. Fortunately, they had the correct response to what I had in mind. I didn't really test that line too much. It felt good at the time. I don't know if that's actually going to be correct in the end, but unfortunately, I didn't draw what I needed, and therefore I lost this round. The next round I went against Ace once again, and this matchup was actually surprisingly easy because the opponent missed the 8-cost event into the 10-cost Whitebeard. I've actually never seen Ace players miss this combo against me. For some reason I only hear about it in rumors, but this time it finally happened, which meant that the opponent was just suffering for aggression because they couldn't necessarily get the cards that they wanted to in time, and because I was able to once again keep 3 life and just push back with the characters that I had from 10-cost Gorose. I believe I played 3 Gorose this game just to make sure that I would win because the opponent countered in a way that if he had a 2k in hand, then he would have ended up winning. He didn't have it in the end, but I just played it safely, played out 10-cost Gorose, made sure I couldn't lose the game, and even though he had 2 to 3 new gates in the end, even with Roger, there was no chance that he could ever beat me. Because he missed the 8-cost event, he actually puddinged me, which was scary because I was expecting the 8-cost event, so I had like 10 cards in hand, and next turn suddenly I was looking for my 10-cost Gorose. Luckily, I drew into a Saturn, which I could search the 10-cost Gorose with, so in the end, I was fine in that regard. I still found my pieces, and he was 1 turn late with his pieces, so therefore, easy win, Ace, bad deck. And now the next matchup, I went against another Imu player. Now, Imu mirrors are very scary. If you're going first, you feel like you've already lost the game sometimes. If you're going second, you just need to hold on, survive for as long as possible. Thankfully, I was able to go second in this matchup, but I was going against a very attituded player, because it's one of those people, I'm sure that you have them in the West as well, that doesn't really talk that much, just plays their cards, turns them, points where they need to go. But not only that, they had Hachi sleeves and a Hachi playmat. Now these playmats and sleeves have very bad reputations in Japan. For some reason, people who use these sleeves and playmats seem to be the most egotistical, just play to win type of people, and just in general not very fun to play against. So when you see the opponent pull out their Hachi playmat, you know it's going to be a bit of a struggle, at least in terms of communication. So not only this though, they had all the Akutami Gege, SP, super shiny, Gorose as well, and everything was shiny. The opponent was trying to draw his cards before I was finishing my turn. I was like, fucking calm down. But it was a very stressful match. But because I was going second, I just played my game, and eventually I just went out. Thankfully, I was able to pull off a pretty reasonable curve where I went 4, 4, 4, and then next turn I played Peter. But because the opponent didn't rest his characters on 7, and I had a rather low hand because I decided to counter, which I believe I over-countered on 1 turn, I should have taken an attack. But because I ended up going down to 3 cards quite early, on the 7th turn, the opponent played his characters and just left them active, obviously setting up to play a Peter on the 9th turn. So therefore, on the 8th turn, I played my Peter and just left everything active once again to force him to hit into my leader, because I was still at 4 life. So I made him hit into my leader. I used the characters on my board to try to clear as much as I could on the opponent's board, played out the Tenka Gorose, and played a very slow game of attrition. Now, the Imu Mirror generally hasn't changed from OP13 to OP14, but the ground death card has made things a lot more interesting. You have to consider lethal not just on the board like it was before and just math out exactly if the opponent has lethal or not, because in this matchup you can actually tell if the opponent has lethal very early on. You also have to consider the fact that the opponent may have ground death, because if they can nullify your Workery, you lose a blocker and the draw, which is very, very significant when the opponent's only going to be hitting you at 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, and like they're 5 from their leader. So I had to play around this as safely as possible. I needed to take my life to an extent to just have enough counter in my hand to be able to defend against some of these attacks later on, but I need to play this very fine balance of not taking too much life that I would happen to lose to if the opponent were to keep all of his characters on the board and go for a Hail Mary ground death, but I also needed to keep enough resources in my hand so that I could actually use the characters on my board as attackers as well to make sure that I can finish the game out before he did. Thankfully, in the end, he recognized the state of the board and decided to go for lethal, and because that lethal failed and I had a lot of counter in my hand, just a bunch of 2Ks in the end, I was able to defend against this attack and go for lethal the turn after that, making it a rather stressful win, but a win nonetheless. The next matchup I went against Blue Yellow Nami, and Blue Yellow Nami is not a deck that you're probably going to see in the West for quite a while because it got significant buffs in EB03, which unfortunately you guys do not have access to. It got access to the 5-cost Nami, which makes you take a life, as we also saw in the Hancock matchup, and also 7-cost Robin, which lets you trash 1 life and gain 2. Effectively, it's just a heal 1, but also with your leader effect, you get to draw 1 card, making it very, very powerful. Not only this, but if you were to KO this card when you're at 0 life, you actually lose the game, making it very difficult to actually take this card out, and if eventually Nami can't swarm the board with these Robins and stuff, it gets very, very difficult to deal with the board. But this is actually an extremely winning matchup for Imu. It's actually the first time that I fought this matchup, because I didn't play too much in EB03, and Nami in OP13 was not very good, but it was the first time I played against this matchup. I wasn't really sure exactly what could come out. I didn't really know what cards were in the deck. I was just trying to play around pudding, because that's the only thing I know how to do against blue. The opponent actually played a pretty scary curve. On 3, they hit for 8k to make me take my first life. On 5, they played the 5-cost Nami, take my second life. On 7, they played the 6-cost Law to make me take my third life. And on 9, they played the 8-cost Kid to make me burn my 4th life. And I was suddenly at 0 life. However, the reason why this matchup is still winning despite all that is because unlike Hancock, who can have the 20,000 leader, the best that Nami can do is use the 1-cost Ace event from OP13, and he actually did this. After a couple of turns back and forth and me slowly winning back control of the game with my 10-cost Gorose, the opponent just tried to go for it. Otama, Otama, Otama into the Ace event and swung for, I believe, 14 or 15 leader. I don't know if he searched before then. And for Imu, that's really not that much. So I was able to defend this attack and win the game after that. The 8th round was against Blue Purple Luffy, and this is actually a person who was in the Japan finals last year, even had the Kaido and the playmat to make sure that people know that. This matchup is generally favored for Imu, but because I was going against a very prolific player, I was still very scared and thinking, this might be the end of my run. But interestingly, in this game, we both had very, very unfortunate circumstances. So the opponent went first, which makes it much easier for Imu to play out the game, but the opponent missed out on ramp on 3. They were able to get 1 ramp in the end, so they were only able to get 1 ramp to get to 10 dong 1 turn early, which is very brutal for Blue Purple Luffy, but it did mean that he was attaching a ton of dong to his leader and swinging into me. Now I was expecting when he had 8 dong that he was going to go into his 10 dong turn the next turn and use Sanji into something, so I'd be fine against pudding. So even though the opponent on the 8 dong turn was swinging into me for 12,000, I decided to take this life because I was like, surely the opponent won't pudding me, and unfortunately unfortunately, although I had all of the Gorose in my trash at that point, the opponent on their Tendong turn was able to 9-cost Sanji into 4-cost Pudding and completely decimate my hand. They reset my hand to Shiraoshi, 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 4k and 3k, and that was very brutal to look at. If I have a search, if I have anything, then maybe I can draw into that 10-cost Gorose, but right now, all I had was counter and very few characters on the board. On that Tendong turn, I used my leader fet to get rid of one of these Shiraoshis, and I draw into Shadia, which is really not the search that you want to find at that point, but it's the only search that I had. I play it down, and I still don't find the Gorose, which means that I do not have Gorose on my Tendong turn. I have no other means of finding it at this point, which for me was feeling like GG, even though the opponent had a pretty rough start to the game. So on my Tendong turn, I spread out my Dong among my characters that I already have on the board, as I was able to set up a Peter on the 8 Dong turn, just hit 8, 8, and 10 I believe with my leader to get him down to 0 life, and left up 3 Dong, although I only had 2 counter events. Now this is a very tricky situation for the opponent to deal with. He actually thought about this for about 5 minutes, and because we still had about 17 minutes on the clock, this was totally fine for me. It's not like the game's going to last too much longer if we're both playing like this. But I needed him to go into my board, so I would just have just one more turn to be able to play out the 10-cost Gorose, and if I could find that first 10-cost Gorose, then hopefully with Saturn I can snowball it into more 10-cost Gorose and eventually push back with that. And that was the one out that I had in mind. Therefore, I left up 3 Dong to make it look like I had more counter than I actually had in my hand, because I only had 2 counter events. On this final turn, the opponent started with 9,000 at leader, and I was able to defend this. If the opponent were to hit me at 7,000 after that, I'd have a very awkward amount of counter in my hand, so either I would have to over counter and just make sure that I stay at 1 life as best as possible, or I could take the life and try to make it look like I had more counter events than I did. Because I still had 2 Dong active at this point, if I technically had a +4, and a 1k, I could easily defend against a 13,000 from Pudding. So my logic tree in this scenario was that if the opponent were to hit at 7k, I would be forced to defend this, but if the opponent were to hit at 8k or 9k, then mathematically I could take the life and still be fine, assuming that my last life was a 1k. However, because I still had about 20-something cards in my deck, because I didn't get my searches rolling early on, there was actually no guarantee that I could actually draw into that Gorose. So I wanted to try to make the opponent go for lethal in a really awkward way, so that he wouldn't be able to stay defensive if he chose to. Still, if he decided to go for 7k first and I just defend this tech, then he could take back board and I'd be and I would lose the game. And if he decided to go for anything higher than 7k, I would be able to actually bait him into going for lethal potentially and win back the next turn. So it was a very complicated mind game, and I think we were both thinking about this because he was thinking about this for about 5 minutes, and I was also there thinking, okay, he's at 7k, I do this, he's at 8k, he's at 9k, all these sorts of plats. But thankfully, he ended up hitting at 9k first with his leader, afraid of the counter events that could potentially be in my hand. And with 9k, I just took that last life, and he hit for 11,000 with Pudding, and with my +4, +2, and +2, I had enough, and he had 0 Dong remaining, so thankfully the next turn I was just able to break through. If the opponent were to play out another turn, he would have easily won that game, but I talked to him after that. He was afraid of the potential of 10-cost Gorose being drawn, and even if he were to play out another turn, he would struggle to actually be able to stabilize the board state. We both had very weird draws in this game, and a lot of very weird mind games. It's also very difficult for me to explain it to you, because at the time this made a lot of sense in my mind, but explaining it now, it seems very, very complicated. But in the end, he hit me at 9k, I took the life, I baited him into going for lethal, which means that he did not have enough counter to defend against my 17,000 from Peter. And now at this point, I'm 7-1, and in Japan, if you get 8-1, then you are guaranteed to be in the top 32, which doesn't necessarily mean that you make top cut, because top cut starts in the top 16, but it means that you get the invite to the Japan finals. If I won this match, I would have been in the Japan finals, but I'm outside the building, so you know that I didn't win that match. I went first against Ace once again, and this time I was not as lucky. Or rather, the opponent was extremely lucky. The opponent on 4 Dong played Marco, on 6 Dong played Yamato, and then played 3 8-cost events into the 10-cost new gate in a row. Now, I set up a situation where I could maybe fight back. I set up 2 Nashiro by 9 Dong, cleared the rest of his board that wasn't 10-cost new gates, and as soon as one of those 10-cost new gates was rested, I triple reduced it with the 2 Nashiro on the board, as well as the Nashiro that came out of 10-cost Gorose, and managed to take out one of the 10-cost on the board. This was very big because it gave me a lot of tempo back in the game, and it almost gave me a chance into this game. But unfortunately, with 3 8-cost events in a row into the 10-cost Roger, there's not much I could do, and eventually I did end up losing by just 3k counter, which, to be fair, is a lot. But for Imu, sometimes that's not really that much. So unfortunately, in the end, I didn't have enough counter to be able to survive the onslaught of attacks from Roger, as well as all the 8-cost events and 10-cost new gates from before that, which means that my run came to an end. I drew exceptionally well in that last game, but it seems like the opponent just ended up drawing better. I guess I could have drawn more counter events, but I think I played as best as I could to my outs. I really used the Nasshiro that I had to the maximum potential and just held onto them desperately onto the board and tried to stay at 3 life for as long as possible to make it as difficult for the opponent to go for lethal as possible, but unfortunately in the end it wasn't enough. So that's why I am here today in front of the building where I just went 7-2 at the championship. A bit disappointed, but happy that I was able to prove to myself, at the very least, that I have what it takes. The Bonney match was tragic. The Ace match, I feel like one small thing could have changed and I could have won that game, and maybe we're living in a different world. But at the very least, I'm happy to have made it all 9 rounds, because in Japan, if you lose 3 rounds, you are forced to drop. And now, because we're at the end of the video, I'm going to shout out a couple of people who told me that they had some good results with Imu thanks to my Imu guide. Thank you very much. It's very appreciated that you guys support me, and I'm glad that it helps you out. There is Surtex, congratulations. There is Fritz Dozang. Hopefully I'm not pronouncing that incorrectly. Don Carleon. Oh god, these names are really hard to pronounce this time. Albert. Oh, that one's easy. Ian Jong. Shit, I think there's one more person that I actually missed in the last video, but I can't find your name right now. So sorry, if I find it again, I'm going to shout it out in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this bit of a low budget, stupid last minute cosplay, but I enjoyed making it, and I'm glad that I did somewhat well in this tournament despite not being able to practice that much OP14. I'll see you guys next time. Make sure to like and subscribe, share, you know, all those YouTube things. I don't know if they actually help, but it helps me out. Even if you don't use the subscription fee, it makes me feel a little bit better if you press the button, so I'd appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.